shakers in the architectural scene, not only in Indianapolis, but nationally. And so that you could hear more about him, I'm going to introduce the president of our NOMAS chapter, Kevin Russell, who will introduce the speaker. But before I do, I just want to publicly thank our speaker, who hasn't been introduced yet, so you may not know who it is, but I would like to publicly thank him for coming up here and doing a fine job teaching here last fall, and publicly say that in addition to thanking him, I would like to say that I hope we can get him to come back and do it again soon. With that completed, I would like to turn the floor over to Kevin Russell to do the formal introduction.
Thanks, Marv. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's guest lecture series. Today, the College of Architecture and Planning and NOMAS has the pleasure of hosting Walter Blackburn of Blackburn Architects in Indianapolis. I had the pleasure of being working closely with Walter last semester while he was a visiting professor. And that proved to be one of the most educational and inspiring portions of my education. Walter's dedication to the profession and to the future of the profession, us, has cultivated our relationship to a wonderful friendship as well as becoming one of my mentors. I would like you to give a warm welcome to Walter Blackburn.
I want to point out that Kevin is wearing a pin that's a replica of an Indiana license plate that says AIA. There's only one person in the state of Indiana who owns that license plate, and that's Walter. Now you can.
Thanks so much, and I must say, Marvin, that sounds loud, exactly. That last semester was one of the most rewarding times in my life also. I've been practicing architecture for about 28 years, starting out as operating out the back of my car and in the basement of my house, and have moved up from that where I to work with the students and see the kinds of things that are happening in architecture school. It's just a rewarding experience, and anytime you invite me back, I will come back. I'd love to do that again. I taught two courses, third-year design and also a seminar course in minority architects. And we were trying to compile a critical mass or a body of work of minority and female architects in this country. And I have 6 or 7 students. I see Kevin was one of them, and I see some other Stacy, I see other people in the crowd that were in that course. And we took 40 minority or female architects and wrote them letters. They responded back to us, and so now we have a file that we will introduce in the library after this lecture on minority and female architects. These are people that are in the field and have been in the field, and nobody's actually paid a lot of recognition to the kinds of work that they've done over the last 50 years. And so we thought here at Ball State, I talked to Marvin about it before I did it, that this would be an excellent opportunity for us to compile this kind of information for students that are coming after us and can be inspired by the hard work these people have done. It all started because Paul, and that's what my lecture is about today, Paul Williams was the first black architect in the AIA, and 1994 was his 100th birthday. And so AIA and the architecture community was celebrating Paul Williams' work. I wanted to do this lecture last year, but things got bogged down, and I was going to come back and do it. But the thing that I want to do is introduce you to Paul Williams and the kinds of things that he's done. As I said, this is his 100th year celebration, and his granddaughter wrote a book on Paul Williams, and it's in your library. But it just came out about 6 months ago, and I encourage you to get it and You look it up in the library and find out some of the kinds of things he's done. Because Paul Williams started out in 1920, and I have slides of this work and we'll go through and show you. But when Paul Williams started out in 1920, his teachers in school discouraged him from becoming an architect because he said there were no blacks building any buildings because they didn't have any money and no white people would give him any work. So he thought he ought to do something else, maybe go into preaching or being a lawyer, that kind of thing. And that made Paul Williams more determined to become an architect. So in 1915, he apprenticed with an architect in Los Angeles and also attended the Beaux-Arts School, which was a school of architecture in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area. Paul Williams matriculated out of high school and then out of the Beaux-Arts School into the University of Southern California, where he received his degree in architecture. And I'm going to try to start the slides. Can you lower the lights a little bit too? This is Paul Williams in 1920. And in 1922, Paul Williams formed his own office. Is that self? Yeah. Formed his own office, similar to the kind of things that I did here in Indianapolis, out of the back of his car, he said, and in the basement of his house. But he started off doing residences. And over this 50 years period that he practiced architecture, Paul did over 3,000 buildings in LA. So Paul Williams actually, and when he started, most of Los Angeles was bean fields and orchards. So he was one of the most influential architects, although he's the least heralded architects in the development of LA. The strange things that happened in this, he started off working for a residential architect and ended up doing houses for the stars in California. And you'll see some of those as we go through with the lecture. But I wanted to digress just a little bit to talk about the effort that Paul Williams had to make to become an architect, because all the balls were stacked against him. The things that he was having to do was not just practice architecture. He had to convince the majority community that they could entrust him with millions of dollars worth of work. And he did this, he says, in a time when most people had a jaundiced eye and kind of looked at him and said, oh, he can't get the work done. But the thing that Paul Williams did was entered a lot of competitions, and during that time in 1922 and 1928, he won over 4 competitions from Chicago all the way across the country to LA. And people began to recognize his work. And although he was probably not one of the foremost creators of architecture, you'll find out that he was one of the more genuine-like architects who did a lot of residential work in LA. The mott that you see there is mott apple juice, and this was sort of a Spanish-influenced residence that he did for Mott. Atkins was owned horse tracks all across horse racing tracks all across the country, and wanted Paul Williams to do a house for him. Actually designed this house and said, how fast could you get it done? Because I just bet a friend of mine that I could build a $500,000 house in 9 months. So Paul Williams did the drawings of his house in a week, and you'll see the drawings in the book. If I ask one of the people in my office, or if I try to do it myself, I know that's an impossible task. But he drew this house for the fellow and gave him a budget in less than a week. His budget was something like $300,000 to do the house. And he said, oh, I have to spend $500,000. So add another $150,000 to the house, because he bet somebody that he could build this $500,000 house in LA. So Paul at that time, and you can imagine, had a lot of troubles trying to add $150,000 to this residence. But he was known as the architect of the stars. This is Lon Chaney's house. Paul Williams did Disney Hernandez's house, but I think we'll get to that. He did Frank Sinatra's house. He's just done over 100 houses of movie stars in California. In 1930, he was married in 1925 and he had 2 daughters. And he started, was married to his wife to his death in 1980. He also did, Jay Kiley is the chairman of the board of CBS, and he did his house in California. And I'll show you several slides of that. This is rear elevation. And he was famous for his Zodiac pool that he did in the back of his house, and the atrium space overlooked the pool.
Would that be okay?
This is the famous Zodiac pool out back of Kiley's house. And you can see how he cantilevered the atrium space over the pool so they thought they were floating in the Zodiac pool. But he did just fabulous spaces. This was the Music Corporation of America, which is really part of RCA, and was bought by the Nickel Corporation. This was a building that he'd done. And this was the first building of the largest building that he'd done at the size in the 1930s. And after that, he was on his way. He did several resort hotels in Southern California. This was the Arrowhead Spring Hotel in Southern California. And this was, you know that the Duesenberg and the Cord were actually manufactured here in Indianapolis. This was Indianapolis. But this was the home of EI Cord. This was the rear elevation. And this was the front elevation. And most of the homes that Paul Williams did were influenced and did influence the California style. You see a lot of Spanish influence in his work. And this is Paul Williams. And not only was Paul an architect, he had to also be an ambassador for the quote, Negro community at that time, because Paul was traveling all over the country doing a lot of work. And this is Paul Williams with Ralph Bunch on my right, and the president of the Virgin Islands on my left. This was the Sunset Plaza apartments that Paul Williams did in Southern California. And this, you can see the Spanish influence here also. And this was, excuse me, just a moment. Palm Spring Tennis Club. And you can see that although Paul Williams did all the architecture for the majority community, Palm Spring Tennis Club and yacht clubs in LA, he always lived in a very modest house and always lived in the African-American community in LA. They were saying that he did houses and front doors of mansions all over the city of LA, and would probably have to go to the back door if he had to be received in those areas at the time. This was Saxton Avenue. He was the architect for Saxton Avenue in LA. Beverly Hills Hotel. We had the AIA convention was in LA 2 years ago, and they had a tour of works of architects from the Los Angeles area, and they never showed us a building by Paul Williams. 3,000 buildings he did. These were some interiors of a house. I'm sorry, of the hotel. And he loved curves. You can see how he undulates all the interiors of the spaces. And Paul Williams, contrary to some of the architects that practice today, did all of his landscaping, all of his interiors, all of the exterior buildings. He was a complete architect in that sense, that he thought the building had to be viewed as a whole. So he would create the landscaping in front of the building and do all the interiors of the space also. So this was the Jockey Club in the Beverly Hills Hotel. It was a restaurant on the first floor. He also did a lot of work for the federal government, the United States Naval Station in LA. And this is the same building. the point I'm trying to make when I show the dates is his career span from 1920 to actually Paul died in 1980. He actually retired in 73, but he practiced architecture for a full 50 years from 1922 to sometime up in 74, 75. This is his family, and I just thought it was a nice picture to see grandkids and kids all in his background. And in 1956, Paul Williams designed his own house, and this house was designed again in the African American community, but he also had changed his style of architecture. He was becoming a modernist in that time, and thought that curved lines, you can see that the living room curves on the left-hand side of the house. His architecture completely changed after from the 20s, 30s, and 40s in the 50s. And you can see that from some of the other slides that I had, that he loved hyperbolic paraboloids, and he did some geodesic kinds of domes. And you can see the curves that he had in his work. He did the Mercedes showroom in Hollywood. I don't know if they gave one of those cars or not, but they did. This is Lucille's Balls and Daisy Arnaz's residence. And this courthouse is famous now. Paul Williams did this. This is where they tried O.J. Simpson. So you see it on the news every day, right? But it was done by an African American architect, and all these things are just American. He was a Republican all his life, although he was in California, although he was an African American. And this is Paul with Nelson Rockefeller, when Rockefeller ran for president in 1960. And in 1965, he worked on the LA airport. And the centerpiece for the airport is the restaurant. Paul Williams designed that restaurant. These are some car dealerships that he done in the city of Los Angeles. And again, just the interiors to show how he loved the curves and tried to incorporate that in his architecture. And these are the hyperbolic paraboloids that came out in the 50s, and they did a lot of this in Denver, and he picked up on it. He loved to do the concrete curved shapes. And this is also reflects in his change in his architecture from the Spanish influence, from the Tudor and English influence. That's what he learned at the Beaux-Arts School when he'd gone in 1914. And so it was reflected in his work, not to the 50s. The 50s did Paul, through influence of other architects that he met, become a modernist. Again, just unlaid walls, these are all kinds of things we talked about in the 70s when I was in school. Paul was doing in the 50s. No, that was the restaurant at the, at this institute of the, excuse me. The Palm Springs Beach House. And this was at the restaurant in the hotel, Beverly Hills Hotel. But he did all the interiors. And this was the pride of his career. And everybody wants to take one picture like this. He was associated with Frank Lloyd Wright on a couple of jobs. And this was a picture of two of them in the late 50s. And this was just a picture that I included to show his style. He was a very gentle man. And this was Mrs. Kaufman, not the same Kaufman that Frank Lloyd Wright worked with, but another Kaufman that did the Arrowhead Hotel. And they were just being entertained by her at their house. This is his wife of over 70 years. I'm sorry, 60 years. Okay, I'll go back to that slide and start in with that. Can we get the lights up there? Some of the points that I want to make, and I say that Paul Williams might not have been, as far as design is concerned, one of the most avant-garde architects, but the kinds of things that he'd gone through, he really did establish his style in California and grew with California architecture during the 20s to the 50s. But all of this he did with the challenge of just trying to keep his office open and trying to garner work on his own. And he did that. That's probably the more amazing feat, because even in this world as we stand here today, it's still hard for minority architects and female architects to get hold of the mainstream of architecture. But I want to say that even after 100 years and after doing 3,000 buildings in LA, it took his granddaughter to write a book about him. Nobody else would write a book and even thought about Paul Williams. And that was the reason for starting the course that we had here at Ball State, because as Kevin knows and some of the other students that had our course, we wrote to over 40 architects, minority architects and female architects, all who were fellows in the AIA, all who have achieved great things in architecture over the last 20, 30 years. And they were anxious to respond to our letters, and they sent us photographs of the work. And I think we did 10 lectures on people like Madison, Madison, Cleveland, Ohio, the first female black FAIA architect. Her name is Kiley. She practices in LA, works with Victor Woollen. We did, I can't think of all the architects, but we did several architects, and we have these now, so in Ball State, we'll have a file in the library, so you can go and research these architects and know exactly the kinds of work they've done. Even Louis Kahn, Blackburn has this exhibit of some of the work that we have done over the past 28 years in Indianapolis. And, Kevin asked me to bring some of those things up there exhibit in the hall. Are there any questions about Paul Williams? Yes. Yeah. Right, okay, right. The question was that could I share with the audience the direct influence that Paul Williams had on my life? I have probably wanted to be an architect all my life. And in 1946, my father brought Paul Williams here to Indianapolis to build Flying House Homes, which was a group of homes, over 500 homes, that were built in Indianapolis for the black veterans that came back from World War II. Paul Williams and another black architect out of Washington, D.C., Hilliard Robinson, designed those homes. And I met Paul Williams at an age of 8 in Indianapolis, and from that point was inspired to become an architect and have, for the last 42 years, pursued that trade. So I knew at the age of 8 that I was going to be an architect, because my father knew I was going to be an architect. And so it was people like Paul Williams and Hilliard Robinson that led me to believe that there was an opportunity and a chance that a minority could participate in the mainstream of architecture. And over the period of time, I've had ups and downs in architecture, but I've always participated on the Indianapolis scene in the mainstream of architecture. My firm at this time is the architect of record for the United project at the airport now. We're the only Indianapolis architect on that project. We are also in all the construction documents for the Arts Garden, which is being constructed downtown Indianapolis in Washington and Illinois Street. And we're also architects for 5 churches in Indianapolis now. And you can see some of the churches that we've done out on the wall here. But I was really here to try to encourage, first of all, minority students to continue with architecture, because although there are 59,000 architects in AIA right now, there are 300 minority architects, African-American architects. There are about 3,000 minority architects, that includes females, Hispanics, Asian, and African-American. So you see that we're just a total, have a total in architecture. We can be an influence on this field if we want to. We have to just all, talk to the student. I'm not trying to talk down to you. The most important thing you can do is education. And that's the kind of thing that's going on here at Ball State. And that's the kind of things that I appreciated last year when I was here to see how intense the students were interested in architecture and seeing what really the changes were being made in architecture. They're happening right here at Ball State. I was at Howard University and I graduated from Howard University. And the facilities that they have don't compare to the facilities that you have here at Ball State. The computer room, the kinds of things that we did in our design course last year, which is absolutely fantastic compared to some of the other architecture schools. I'm going this weekend on the NAAB review of Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And that doesn't compare to Ball State. I took the test, the architectural examination at Ball State 28 years ago in the Quonset hut across the way. Where did Sappenfeld here? Sappenfeld came from Washington, D.C. the same time I did. I finished Howard, we both came out together. He started architecture school, and we went from there. I met Marvin about 6 years later. We were racing down the highway together. He stopped me, wanted to know where I got that license plate from. So I've been involved in the architecture community in Indiana for the last 27 years. And my inspiration was a person like Paul Williams. Any questions? Yes.
Walter, can I try two questions? One is, you mentioned his interest in also designing interiors. I wonder how far he took that. Did he design furnishings and decorative arts?
He did.
Did he have a market? Was he able to break into a market for that as well?
He did design furniture, and some of the furniture in the Polo lounge that he did in the first floor of the Beverly Hills Hotel. But he enjoyed interiors so much. Both of his daughters were interior designers. And they are in business now in Los Angeles. And his granddaughter who wrote the book, her name is Hudson now, has a son who's studying interior design. So yes, he did design furniture as well as the spaces.
Did he find manufacturers interested in products?
Not Noel and not Herbert Miller, but some of the small local firms did produce furniture for particular jobs. And when he designed the furniture, they were manufactured. But I don't think he's ever manufactured furniture like the Ewing Miller chair or the Victoria chairs or that kind of thing.
My other question was, how large a practice do we have in our Is there a generation of architects now working in LA who came out of his office?
Well, his office is closed now, but there's a fellow that last year received his fellowship who had worked for Paul Williams over 32 years. His name is Harold Williams. No kin, no relationship to him. But yes, architects that worked in his office, second generation coming along now with their own firms, and they're probably 20. 3 or 4 have had their fellowships in the area now. So he did influence a number of architects, including me, to become architects and who have continued in practice. The same way, although we're talking about Paul Williams, the same way on the East Coast with Sylvia Robinson, who designed all the buildings at Howard University and a lot of buildings for the government. They actually did joint projects together in the Midwest. I told you they did work for my father, Flying House, and for other institutions around the country. Paul Williams and Sylvia Robinson actually had an office in Washington, D.C. And Paul had an office also in Bogota and did a lot of work in South America. In fact, he did University of Bogota in South America. Yes?
Are there any things that you could be doing as a college or as a student body or a faculty body to address the question of access or support for a broader representation among us so that we do really reflect society and we don't represent a particular stratum or...
Right. I think it works like a sine curve. I've watched the architecture community at Ball State for 27 years, and I see more minority students sitting in the audience today than I've ever seen ever. I follow the work of war architects who who are in LA right now doing the same kinds of things that Paul Williams was doing 30, 40, 50 years ago. Graduate of Ball State University, he has his own firm practicing, over 30-man firm practicing in LA right now. Short, I think his name's John Short, George Short, works in Indianapolis, Ball State graduate. We've had several Ball State graduates work in our office. Most have been majority architects, but this year I've had a freshman student work in the office this time, and Kevin will be our intern in our office this time. And over that period of time, I've had over 12 people from Ball State working in my office. And this year I'm trying to encourage minority architects to come and work in our office. I have a 23-man office in Indianapolis, and we try to have at least one intern every semester. Any other questions? I hope that in some way I've exposed the majority community in Ball State to the practice of architecture as practiced by some of the minority architects and female architects around the country. We will, this semester, try to wrap up our investigation and have that information in the library for the students. Our course went on a little longer, and I got ill at the end of it, so we weren't able to finish it. But all my students have promised me, Stacy, that we will finish up this semester with that information. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.